Okay, let's look at another weird coincidence here on the idea of cynocephaly. This is where in mythology they said people had a dog head instead of a human's head, like the depiction you see in this gargoyle up here. But it's all over the ancient world. In fact, it was found in Africa and even in the Orient. And actually, where my place is here down at the very bottom of this in Africa, they said, well, at the end of the people that were living there by the Horn, they said there lived people that were the most fair, like skinned and haired of any people, and they lived a long life and ate fish primarily and so on. Then there's a people just past that in mythology, like in Herodotus and other people that made mention of it, that there was a people called a skiapods. Now these skiapods didn't have two legs, but they had one gigantic leg and they hopped around. And they used that one big foot for a parasol, kind of like a sunbreaker, if you will, for themselves. And then just past that area there, they said that there were a people that were dog-faced. And one wonders if they were talking about prognostic appearances, but most people would realize quickly that that's something that's more simian or ape-like than dog-like. But there is Snoop Doggie dog and that type of situation, so one has to wonder. But in the other positions that's noted, we can find that they're pretty much at the edge of the known world. In fact, at the African circumstance that they talk about here, that was the known world. That actually, from the point that they get to those people that are most fair of everything, and then skiapods and dogs, that's all mythological type people, and people understand that somewhat now, but it does put the dog people at the edge of the world. But just like when we talk about Ethiopians, and I did a recent video on it showing you that the ancient tales of Ethiopians of Greek were not the people of a place called Ethiopia that we talk about today. That happened post Herodotus' times, because they were going around trying to search out these mythologies and what was true about them. And where Herodotus never went was actually where they said that Ethiopians were at the far eastern and far western edge of the world, like these two depictions that are shown here. And that they were sunburnt faced because everybody had this belief back in the day that the sun went down and went into the ocean right there off the course of the east, or actually in the west, is sunset, where it went down in the ocean and then it rose again from the Orient. And we still have that idea today, and you can see it reflected in concepts like Japan being the land of the rising sun, because when the people went there in the first place, they talked about that. Well, the rising sun is always at the horizon of wherever you are. So it's a little different than what they gave effects to, but these dog-headed people, that's crazy. Cynocephaly. You can see the ancient Celts and Vikings had this idea here, and it almost comes across as being a wolfman type of thing. And there are a lot of people that believe that some of these ancient tales came from this idea. You can see it in far western beliefs, in Greece, in Egypt, and in India, and even in China. And of course, you can see something analogous to this whenever you look at ancient Egypt, and they have a god of death as Osiris, and he's a dog-faced man. But there is that tale where just past Osiris there in Egypt, there are dog-faced people. And that has led people to the idea that when we're talking about this, we're talking about werewolves. And it's possibly where the idea of a werewolf person came from in the first place. Well, a secondary about too. they noticed that people had something that they attributed to lycanthropy, and that looks like in a modern day where it's rabies. And if people got it, they would turn into a wild man, and all kinds of bad things happen whenever you knew he was a real mild-mannered guy before any of this kicks in. Then there's an effect of lunacy, where the moon actually affects people sometimes psychologically, and their hair even grows faster during that point, and so they put that together. A couple of Halloweens ago, I did a special on that, but here's another viewpoint at it, sticking another pin in the wall here, if you will, and how this could easily connect with this idea of werewolves, or its foundations, if you'd say. Just like there are foundations of an idea like a Frankenstein mummy before that ever came out, and Shelley and all the things like that. Or the idea of a golem being put together, or a man being put back together and bringing it back to life, like Osiris himself. So there's a weird connection across this idea of werewolves, vampires, and golems, if you will. For we're all supposedly the product of a golem spell. We're God, much like the Greek gods, and the Sumerian gods actually built a fake statue man out of clay and then brought that to life like Adam. But we are all familiar with Anubis, and now he's a dog-headed protector over the graveyards and so on, and people have said, oh, that's jackals or that's dogs and so on too. Well, they had dogs as protectors over that. In the pre-dynastic times, they find a man who ended up having a zoo where he had all kinds of animals. Yeah, he had ostriches and a giraffe and this, that, and the other, all kinds of animals. Whenever he died in his shrine, they surrounded his shrine with these animals, and then at the key cardinal points around that, he placed dogs, watchdogs. And it's believed that whenever these dogs were taken into the afterlife, they weren't dead yet. They were taken symbolically, just like a bunch of people were in that same burial, to go with him in the afterlife. And I know a lot of people freak out about that idea, but in this time, that people had the idea that they could never make it to heaven or do this, that, and the other, but if they went with the king, they were guaranteed the idea. So it makes you wonder why they would go along with it, but yeah, they go along with that idea. So here we have something that looks like a Rottweiler, if you will, and wrinkle-faced and all that type of idea of a American werewolf in Egypt. But sure enough, and he's a god of good, not bad or whatever, just because you go to hell whenever it all happens. But Ctesias, a Greek philosopher, guy in the 5th century BC, wrote about a people in India that had this look, and then Megasthenes also spoke of them, and he said these guys spoke by barking at each other like dogs, which is a strange occurrence. But whenever you hear it about India and so on, that is the edge of the known world, not a north-south type of situation, but a far east and a far west, the rising and the setting of the sun, just like it was for Ethiopians in its originality. You can just look up Herodotus's map. This is a depiction of Herodotus here. And when you look at his map, you can find all these areas that were called Ethiopians at the time, because luckily we're right at the age of exploration, and they were going around saying, okay, well, we've had this mythology for hundreds and hundreds of years, don't even know where it goes off of, but we're going to go there and see what correlation it has, and if we don't see it, we're going to talk to the local people and get some hearsay on what they say. Well, they said they had giant dog-sized ants in India that drug out gold and did all kinds of things, but then there was also a dog-faced people somewhat there. You wonder if that's the native population of South India, but no, it appears they had this concept. It's one way of proving that Herodotus never went to these places, because he went off hearsay and said, well, they say this, and a lot of times he'll tell you that he doesn't agree. But it's written in many old tales and stuff, and Herodotus even tells you that they have somebody in ancient Libya. And here they show this pin stuck in the idea of Libya right there. Let's change that a little bit. All of Africa was called Libya at the time. Yeah, Caucasians named it Libya, and then later they named it Africa, foreign by themselves. But whenever they say Libya, and you know Libya today is right there, you don't stick a pin in it. Well, it's at the southern border of Libya. Well, that's not the southern border of Libya that was in ancient times. The southern border of Libya means actually sub-Saharan Africa. It gets to that point. That's the cutoff. So it's a drastic end of the world type of thing too. And you look at Herodotus' map and they don't even know sub-Saharan Africa exists. They used to call this area the Abyss. In fact, what we call Ethiopia today was up until modern times called Abyssinia. It's all been changed, but it's been changed for an idea of what Herodotus has went off of. But if you look at every depiction before then and telling of where they were at the far eastern edge and western edge of the world where the sun rose and set. And it doesn't mean black skin, it means sunburnt people. And when you hear that, well, they aren't sunburnt. Well, there was supposed to be this idea of the sun god's child wanting to run the chariot, and he drove it through there, and then they said, okay, well, that's how black people formed. They all got burnt. That sounds great, but then how about whenever they have kids? The kids wouldn't be burnt. Well, they actually, in Herodotus' thing, talk about the semen of dark-skinned people actually being dark semen instead of white semen. So, this shows you what the Egyptians and the Greeks and everything were, because we know what color that is, regardless of the color of your skin whatsoever. But also that they're going off a lot of hearsay. A lot of it. But was this the Libya that he was talking about, or was it south, even out of the picture right now? Well, it was south, even out of the picture right now. That pin's showing something different. But here we have these long-haired people that have dog snouts onto them. Look kind of weird. Yeah, Cynocephaly, it's something odd. It's an odd mythology. But then whenever you look at it and you see that the Caucasians and all the people that helped bring civilization together had this idea that one of the oldest stories ever is the fact that whenever you go to try to go into the afterlife, there are a couple of dogs there. And you have to get past those dogs. Well, if you do, one of them becomes a helper for a point of it too. You get past a certain point, there's another dog there. And then you make it in. This is why they have Cerberus, the hellhound. And instead of being multiple dogs in the idea, he just have multiple heads, doesn't he? Like a Hydra dog. Yeah, but also at the edge of the world, there's mythologies of things that happen when you live and die, because just like all the Egyptian pharaohs, whenever they died, they went over into the sky, through the Milky Way, and around the world, down into the underworld, and then came back living by day. So they'd have that same idea dreamt into it too, and is there a dog in the Egyptian idea? Yeah, I mean, he's prominent as hell. It's Osiris. Or, I mean, Anubis. Anubis, Osiris, and a few others, Set and Horus, always take you on this original journey with them. And then once that happens, you're in your own Elysian fields, right? Well, what's crazy about this weird mythology, when people found out that it didn't exist anywhere, is about 1,000 years later, during the Byzantine era, it reared its head again. And it doesn't make any sense, but sure enough, there are people starting to be depicted and told of this idea, even saints in your Bible, who are said that they were dog-faced. I'm serious. Mainly the Eastern Orthodox Church hooked up through that, but one famous one is St. Christopher. Y'all know St. Christopher. Well, there's a picture of him here. Up until the 18th century, they used to show him that, and you can still find it in all these temples in the Byzantine area anyhow. In the New Testament, they actually tell you that St. Christopher was a man with a dog's head on it, kind of wild and crazy, before he all of a sudden found Jesus, and then he turned into the man that we know of as St. Christopher. Oh yeah, a lot of people don't know that some of these stories have so much mythology stuff into them, you'd laugh it off. And the reason you don't ever hear about these is because they don't mention it anymore, because it would make a mockery of their whole thing whenever they were real certain about this one thing. And then, now we're hundreds of years past the fact that we're real certain that never happened. But yeah, St. Christopher himself and other saints have been shown with these dog faces onto them. And it makes you wonder who they're talking about. And like, who could it be? Because, black people have this prognathism. And in at least 2 of these cases, it looks like, well, there are black people if you go past that point. Or are they aware of those people? Well, the other 7 places that they point out, there aren't. And in fact, that one with Herodotus and so on looks like the same problem with the Ethiopians, that he's trying to attach it to some place up there, because they've already gone east and west and found that that isn't true. So now they've got to go to the other extremities or 4 corners of the earth, don't they? It's crazy. Do you think that there were ever dog-faced people here? I know there hasn't been any archaeology that shows it. Even the most mutated human or whatever, and the elephant man in that type of situation doesn't even start to reach upon it. So I wonder what they're talking about. Well, it looks like it's all a mythology about that companion that we've had for tens of thousands of years as dogs, as accompanying us into the afterlife. You can even see that where the idea of hell comes from in Cerberus the Hellhound, because hell is actually a princess of Proto-Indo-European people who died on the trek on the way there, and she had so much reverence that they ended up apparently killing her dog and taking it with it. And they were so certain that dog was there in the story because she was just adopted into that story that goes back tens of thousands of years, where there's a dog that tries to aid you or impede you in part of your view to the afterlife. In Egypt, they changed that into a fact that if you fail, you get eaten by a crocodile, hippopotamus, weird creature and stuff off of it. But that's because you already have the dog over here in the boat with you. Let me know what you think down below. Just thought I'd touch upon this. Is there another thing that's showing a connective and something that just doesn't make any sense almost? Just thought I'd throw it out there. Peace.